My name is David Schenker from the Department of Classics, Archaeology, and Religion, and it is my great pleasure to bring back a friend who has come from the 5th century BCE Athens. I know, Gamal Castile, who has done presentations and workshops and classes, but he stopped about 4 years ago when the world stopped. And so this is his first time back since then. We are so lucky to have with us Gamal Castile, bringing to life the world and the equipment of the 5th century BCE Greek hoplite, that is the heavy armed foot soldier. Gamal's varied career and accomplishments include certification as a history and social studies teacher, 13 years in law enforcement, a role as the god Anubis in the 2021 movie Shakespeare's Mummy, and he has a black belt in Shotokan karate, is a certified instructor, now Okinawan karate. Gamal is an expert bodybuilder, as his many victories attest. First place in the 2016 Midwest Bodybuilding Championship, and first place in the 2018 Missouri State Bodybuilding Championship. When not competing himself, Gamal helps other people realize their potential through his personal training consultation business, Smart Bodies. You too can look like Gamal. With that, I will turn it over. Thank you so much for being here.
It's definitely a great pleasure to be back here at Mizzou. This is my alma mater, and this is where I started my journey in presentations with Greek history, ancient Greek warfare lectures. Let's start today with the essence of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from one of the poems of Tyrtaeus, who was a Spartan poet and general of approximately the 8th century. Let him take a wide stance and stand strongly against them, digging both heels in the ground, biting his lip with his teeth, covering thighs and legs beneath, his chest and his shoulders under the hollowed-out protection of his broad shield, while in his right hand he brandishes the powerful war spear and shakes terribly the crest high above his helm. Our man should be disciplined in the work of the heavy fighter and not stand out for missiles when he carries a shield, but go right up to fight at close quarters and with his long spear or short sword thrust home and strike his enemy down, placing foot next to foot, pressing shield against shield, bringing crest near crest, helm near helm, and chest near chest. Let him battle it out with the men opposite, grasping the handle of his sword or the long spear. What we're going to talk about today is classical warfare in ancient Greece, 5th century primarily. Classical warfare in this period was based around the phalanx, the tactic of the phalanx, which was basically a giant square or rectangle of massed men packed tightly together, shield against shield with bristling spears. So this was during the classical period. Of course, we have approximately 5 periods of ancient Greek history. We have the Mycenaean period, also sometimes referred to as the Homeric period, or the Age of Heroes. This was the time where the stories of Homer are about, the Iliad, the Odyssey. We have our heroes, Achilles. To the prior generation of that, we have Heracles, Jason and the Argonauts. We have Odysseus and his travels. That era lasted from approximately 1600 to about 1100 BC. And at that time, we have the cataclysm that resulted in the disappearance of that great time in Greek history, of the Mycenaeans, which then brings us into the Greek Dark Ages, the Archaic period, which lasted until about 800 BC. We don't have much literature or where the Greeks were much more disorganized at that point, after the fall of Mycenae and the Mycenaean states. From then on, we have the advent of the classical period, from approximately 800, the 8th century or so, down until the conquest of the Macedonians in 338 BC with Philip II of Macedon, taking over the majority of Greece. which then leads us into the Hellenistic period, with the rise of Alexander, the conquest of Persia, and then the successor states. And that takes us down to approximately 168 BC to the Battle of Pydna, when the Roman maniple proved superior to the Macedonian phalanx. But today's discussion is mostly going to be around the classical period and the Greek Hoplite, or we might pronounce it Hoplite to save ourselves from trying to speak ancient Greek, which we don't actually know. So, none of these lectures are precisely the same. They all depend on you. This is an interactive lecture from beginning to end. And what I do is I take questions during the course of the lecture, and then I try to weave that and carry us down a pathway or a stream of knowledge and stories and anecdotes about ancient Greek history, so that we can learn what and who was the Greek hoplite, how did the phalanx work, and just gain an appreciation for ancient Greek history of the classical period. You have to understand that the classical period is highly relevant to Western civilization. This is what we base a lot of our philosophies and precepts of Western civilization on. It's the ancient Greeks of the classical period. And if it weren't for the underdog of the Greek city-states winning against the invasion of the massive Persian Empire during the Battle of Marathon and in the first invasion under Darius, or the second invasion under Xerxes in 480 and 479 BC with Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale, then the Greeks wouldn't have flourished in what we know now as Greek culture and philosophy, science, and literature, which are so relevant to Western civilization. All right? So it was these men, these individual, independent, free men of ancient Greece that put themselves on the line to save that culture, or what that culture would be, which later on became our culture of Western civilization. So, with that, I open up the floor to any kind of questions that you might have. Yes, sir?
What's the purpose of the shape of the head of your walking stick?
Excellent question. You know, that is always one of the first questions. My walking stick, a similar walking stick can be called a bacterion, can be called a skeptron, or it can be called a scutali. This particular one is a Spartan scutali. All right? The Spartan scutali was not only the walking stick which Spartan emissaries would carry, but it was a symbol of their authority, of that they carried with them the authority of Sparta when they carried the scutali about. Right? The scutali also worked as a cryptography device, and it's our first known cryptography device. Everybody obviously knows what cryptography is, right? Cryptography from the Greek kryptos, which means hidden or secret. So it's a secret language or a hidden language. And what we would do with the scutali, we as if I was there, what we would do with the scutali was, upon a campaign, when a Spartan king would go out on campaign, part of this is conjecture, because we only have 1 to 2% of what was left by the Greeks that we gain all of our knowledge from. So the extent knowledge of what we have of the Greeks is only 1 to 2% of what actually existed. So we piece together literature, we piece together pottery, we piece together archaeological finds, and we piece together what other historians later, primarily the Romans, said about the Greeks from hundreds of years before. But the scutali, if I was going on campaign, and let's say Dr. Schenker was one of the ephors, all right, and I'm one of the kings, because Sparta had 2 kings. It was a diarchy. Okay, there was always 2 kings, one from the Agiad dynasty and one from the Eurypontid dynasty. So we would have the scutali, and we'd have dual scutalis made, identical in width, breadth, and length. And then we would wrap a ribbon around the head of the scutali and write our message on it. And more than likely, there were probably symbols, sort of like today's emojis, nonsense symbols or things like that, that would be stuck in between, which we would know what those symbols were, because we would coordinate that prior to leaving on campaign. And as long as I had the same scutali of the same width, breadth, and length, then when I received the message, the ribbon from the messenger, I would know the starting point, because we'd have a designated starting point, and I'd wrap that message around my scatali, and I'd be able to read the message. Now, if somebody intercepted the messenger en route, they would just have a ribbon with nonsensical letters and symbols on it, because they wouldn't have the right cryptography device to rewrap it and get the right order of the symbols and letters. So the scatali is not only the symbol of authority that Spartan emissaries carried on campaign or carried into other areas, but it was also the first known cryptography device. Cleomenes, who was one of the Spartan kings of the early 5th century, who was also known as an alcoholic, is known to have beat people over the head when he was displeased with them in his scatali. So if a drunk, angry Cleomenes came up to you and rapped you on the head with his scatali, he was showing you that even as a Spartiate, he had greater authority than you as the drunken king, who often made decisions based on rage. Any other questions? Yes?
It looks like a shield or something there that has the fur and the 2 gold pieces. It's a kind of a strange shape. What is that?
The fur and the 2 gold pieces.
Yes.
This?
Yeah.
All right. This is a pelta shield. A pelta shield would have been used by the Scythians. The Scythians were a nomadic horse tribe, so basically a cavalry. They were a nomadic horse tribe that lived in where the modern day steppes are of like Ukraine, around the Black Sea area. And so pelta, they would use this pelta shield as their protection, and then with a short spear or javelin, they could put the spear here and jab at you. And I, again, had a wardrobe malfunction. And they could jab at you with the protection of the pelta. And so this is covered in cowhide, and it has eyes on it, because you'll see all the shields have an emblem, which is called a blazon. And the blazon always had a symbolic meaning to it. All right? The symbolic meaning was usually, these were very superstitious people. The Greeks, the Scythians, the Persians, all of them. The Egyptians. And so symbolism meant a lot to them. So here you have eyes looking at you. Probably some of these would be, maybe like in the Greek culture, you might have a gorgon. For instance, here we have a flying gorgon coming at you. So the flying gorgon was meant to instill fear. You know, gorgon, like Medusa. So, oh my God, the gorgon's coming at me, I'm scared, right? Some might be a symbol of protection, okay? So there were various blazons and symbolism that were used on various devices. So this is a pelta, often used by the Scythians. And the Scythians would hire themselves out sometimes as mercenaries to the Greeks. The Athenians used Scythians quite often as archers and to supplement the phalanx. Another question, please. Yes?
So, with the circular shields, those 2 are a lot bigger than the ones at the back there.
Mhm.
What would the difference in use between those be?
The difference in use between the size is theatrical lectures like this. These are not authentically sized aspide. All right? So a shield in general is called a hoplon. And that's where we derive the name hoplite or hoplite. So a hoplon, or oplon, I guess, is shield, right? And a hoplite is one who carries the shield. And so there could be several types of shields. Like the pelta is one type of shield. But the aspis is the large, round shield carried by the hoplite. And the aspis is also referred to as the Argive shield. And it's referred to the Argive shield because it's believed that the 7th century, I believe, king of Argos, or tyrant of Argos, Phaedon, is the one who probably developed this shield and standardized it. So it's called the Argive shield. This shield would cover you from knee to chin. And that when you stood in the phalanx, shield upon shield, standing next to each other, part of your shield covered the person next to you. And the point of the shield was to create cohesion in the phalanx, in this shield wall, this mass of shielded men marching towards you. Aristotle said that the aspis had very little use outside of the phalanx, because the way that it's designed, it's so large and bulky, it's not really designed optimally for individual combat. It's designed for the phalanx, to bring cohesion to the phalanx, which was the armed mass of men. Demaratus, who was a Spartan, he's the one that went into exile and ran to the Persians, and then was a counselor to King Xerxes. Demaratus said that the hoplite dons his helmet and his breastplate for his own sake, but dons the aspis for the sake of the formation. Okay? So the difference in the sizes, these are authentically sized. They will go from knee to chin and cover my entire body, which you'll see a little bit later. The small ones are for when I take you in the audience and I have you participate in a small phalanx at the end. So it's financially and space-wise inconceivable for me to have that many full-sized aspidae. So I have these little mini aspidae which are painted up to look nice for you to use later on. That's the difference in size, just practicality. Okay? Yes?
Did the individual soldiers have to pay or come up with their own
Yes.
equipment, or did the state provide?
No, the state did not take care of things until much, much later into the Hellenistic age. Maybe possibly during the Peloponnesian War, there might have been some state issuing of things, like with the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans. But the individual hoplite was a free, independent man. And if he had the wealth or the means to buy a panoply, so hoplon is shield or weapons, arms. Hoplite is one who carries those arms. Panoply is all, pan meaning all of the arms. So when I am fully geared up with my spolos, my chronos, my kinemides, and my aspis, I'm in full panoply. All the weapons and arms. But these were often passed down from father to son, because they were quite expensive at times, especially when we're talking about a fully bronze thorakos. Okay, so here, you see these thorakos at the bottom? So these are breastplates which would have completely encapsulated the body, the torso of the hoplite. All right? And that would have been cast out of bronze. And it would have been very expensive. So that would have been passed along, generationally to generationally, unless you were of means and could afford your own. But these fell out of favor toward the beginning of the 5th century because they didn't have the mobility. They had greater protection, but if they were damaged, they were difficult to fix because they were cast bronze and hammered out. But they were also super expensive, and you didn't have much mobility while you were in them. So these lost favor, the thorakos lost favor to the spolos. These are the spolos, or spoli for plural. The spolos is made of leather. So this particular spolos is 3-ply saddle leather. Plus it's covered in bronze trauma plating. And it has over 400 interlocking, overlapping bronze scales to protect my viscera from spear attacks or sword slashes. This is extremely protective. And I can tell you that going from having been a police officer for 13 years, wearing my police uniform, and my Kevlar and everything else, and wearing this, although this wouldn't stop a firearm, wouldn't stop a bullet racing at you at 1,900 feet per second, but this is extremely protective. I could take a sword slash, I could take a spear strike with this 3-ply saddle leather, 400 bronze scales. This one here obviously isn't quite as protective. It's not mine. So, obviously it's mine, but it doesn't even fit me, wouldn't even remotely fit me. But this is just leather with only a couple of bronze plating. Right? So you can see how, just based on the cost of the item, Hoplite that had a greater financial means might be able to afford something of a higher level of protection. A Hoplite with less financial means. Stand up, Hoplites. Turn around. You see these are simply like fabric, okay? So they might have had some that were just simple leather and nothing else, or maybe just multiple plied fabric or padding. There is a belief taken from a couple of lines, one or two lines in the Iliad, referring to the lenothorax. The lenothorax, they believe, is a spolos, or like this type of design, which is often called a tube and yoke. This is the tube that fits around you, and this is the yoke, just like a yoking something. So it's called a tube and yoke design. So they believe that possibly many, many, many layers of linen were glued together and hardened to create a protective piece of armor. Okay? I really don't agree with that so much, because linen was more hard to come by, and linen was much more expensive, and it would have been much more intricate to create a lenothorax, a linen thorakos, whereas leather would have been very easy to come by, very cheap, and very easily to work with. And you could have easily fixed the leather with a new piece of leather if something happened to it. But you can see how they have much less protection because they are poor hoplites, and I am a wealthy hoplite. Okay? Another question? Yes?
When you talk about the materials when it came to your armory, what about the materials when it came to the asbestos? Would we expect to see them made out of woods, out of
The
metal?
asbestos would be made out of wood, and commonly made out of either willow or poplar, which are often called wet woods, because somehow the property of the wood, I'm not a wood expert, if there's any arborists in here, poplar and willow are called wet woods because apparently they're able to somehow self-seal, if you will, if jabbed or stabbed, rather than like a hardwood or something which would just splinter and break. So these would be many, many, many planks of wood glued together and then shaped into this dome. These are basically a bowl. This becomes a bowl. Anybody have a particular asbestos? What?
Serpent.
Serpent, the pithos? All right, so we have the pithos and the gorgon. So here, on the inside of the asbestos, we have a very, very interesting design concept called a porpax. The porpax was the center piece of the asbestos which would go around your forearm. And then over here you have the antalabe. The antalabe is the handle. And then we have this, some people think it's vestigial, like it used to have, it's called a telemon, or a shield strap. And back during the Homeric period, the Mycenaean period, the Iliad and everything else, they had what were called tower shields, which would have been a huge wicker shield with a telemon on it. The telemon would have been lashed around their shoulders, and I would have sat there with my battle spear or my sword. No more need for the pithastos. I would have sat there with my battle spear. And I would have had my tower shield with the strap, and I would have set the shield down. And it would have just stood there like a barrier. And then I would have been behind the shield, striking at my opponent. And I might move the shield and set it down again. And then stab my opponent from behind the safety of my shield. So the shield was literally seated on the floor. Okay? So a tower shield would have covered me like a tower wall. Okay? But those fell out, hundreds and hundreds of years, 600-700 years before the classical period. Those were no longer in use. And now we started to use the aspis, which was possibly designed by Phaedon of Argos. Hence the Argive shield. Now, your arm would have fit through the porpax and then grab the antalabe. Now, this telemon, some people think it's just a vestigial piece left over in honor of the old telemon from the heroic age. Coming from as a martial artist and I teach Okinawan karate, I go from the principle that everything has a use. in combat, you're not going to have anything that doesn't have a practical use. Because you're not going to want to carry something useless into combat, which weighs you down, is more encumbering, and just gets in the way. Everything's going to have a purpose and a use. So I do not subscribe by the theory that this is just a vestigial piece honoring the old Homeric, Telamon shield strap of the heroes of the Iliad. I think it has an actual purpose. And that purpose stems from a Spartan saying called "Itan e epitas," with this or upon this. So this is what Spartan mothers would say to their sons who had graduated from the agoge when they would be presented with their aspis and going off on campaign to battle. They would be presented with the aspis, and the mother would say, "Itan e epitas," with this or upon this. And what does that mean? With this or upon this. That means you either come back victorious with this, carrying it, or upon it. You've been killed in battle, and they're using this as a litter. And your friends are holding on to the telemon like a litter bearers and carrying your body with it. That seems like a practical purpose to me. Itan e epitas, with this or upon this. It makes sense to me. There's no proof or anything that shows that or says that specifically, because we only have 1 to 2% of Greek knowledge that still exists. But if we think about it logically, because the Greeks were just like us. They were smart people, probably smarter than us, okay? Except for some of us in here. Some of us in here I know are very smart, okay? Especially those that wear yellow. All right? So, they were very smart. They wouldn't have had a saying that didn't have a meaning, right? So my thought is that the telemon was a strap that you would place the fallen body of your comrade on as you carried him off the field and carried him back home. Now, as you look at this, you can see that the aspis covers me from knee to chin. Okay? And if you look at the back side, now you see where my arm is in the center, right? If I change the position of my arm, the position of the shield doesn't really change much, does it? But if I were to have a rectangular shield or a shield with a center grip, like a lot of medieval shields or whatever, or a buckler, then the angle, the proportion of my shield is how it responded to me would change completely with my grip. But here, with the Argive shield and the center porpax, my arm can move 180 degrees, and it really doesn't change the positioning of the protection of the shield. Okay? Now you see there's a lip on here too. The lip I can comfortably lay on my shoulder. Because this gets heavy. This is about 13, 14 pounds of wood and bronze. Oftentimes, the shield would be covered in a thin, millimeter thick layer of bronze covering the top of the shield. And there would be a design painted on it or something like that. Oftentimes, like this, the Pythos, the Gorgon, whatever your patron deity of your city might be, or the symbol of your tribe, or there's one story of a Spartan who had a life-sized fly painted on his shield. That's all that was on it. So a fly was painted on the shield. And they said, why do you have just a tiny little picture of a fly painted on your shield? And his response was, because when I get close to my enemy, it'll look gigantic. Right? Because again, shield against shield, chest against chest, helm against helm. Phalanx warfare, as you'll see, was where the men, the hoplites, got right up on top of each other. If he had, hoplite, stand up. Go ahead and grab that shield. If I was Greek fighting Greek, Polis fighting Polis, when we fought, we're not going to slam these together because these are paint jobs and everything else, but when we fought, we would be up against each other pushing. He's going to be pushing against me, I'm going to be pushing against him. Right? We're going to be in this type of scrimmage, almost like a rugby match. We're going to be pushing against each other. But then there's going to be 8 people behind me. There's usually 8 files, or 8 lines. There will be 7 people behind him pushing into his back. So now we've got this added mass of all of these hoplites, all in approximately 70 pounds of gear, with Aspis, Spolos, Kronos, Kinemides, all pushing against each other in what's called othismos, the push, right? Now, as we're doing the push, there are other hoplites. I'll use this one. Other hoplites with the dory. The dory is the 8-foot heavy battle spear. The dory has 3 parts. It has the shaft, the wooden shaft. It has the acme, which is the iron razor-tipped head, and it has the bronze serrator, the bronze butt spike on the end. Serrator means lizard sticker, because I guess if you saw a lizard or something on the floor, it's sticking. But there's a lot of reasons for the serrator, which I'll talk about. Anybody want to gently, I don't have insurance for this show, touch the tip of that? Do you think that's sharp? Okay? This would go straight through 3 of you. Okay? I've actually tested it. I've actually tested it on bovine carcasses. I went to Mizzou's meat market or whatever, where they have the big giant bovine carcasses and stuff, and I've tested these on video, which you can actually see on my YouTube channel. I mean, so a bovine rib cage is much bigger than our rib cage, right? And this just goes right through it like butter. And on the end of it is like a steak, you know? This just goes right through it like nothing. So it would go through you and 1 or 2 people behind you like nothing, assuming that you had no armor on. Okay? This is deadly, all right? And this is real. Now imagine, as we are fighting, all those rows of people behind, right? Maybe not the guys in the front, because they're too concerned with just pushing it against the guy. But the guys in the back are sitting here gigging, basically like gigging frogs, right? They're gigging the guys in front, stabbing and stabbing. It's called the Doritismos, the storm of spears. Okay? So a Greek battle would basically have a few elements to it. It would have the element of Epholos, the march up to the battle. Then we have the element of the epidrome, the charge, the 2 sides charging into each other. I believe the first instance that we have of this is at Marathon, where they charged into the Persian line on the beaches at Marathon. And then you would have the othismos, where the promakoi, the front rankers, would literally be pushed up against each other, smashing and pushing, like I showed. Then, I don't think these happened in, like, one happened, like the othismos happened, and then the doritismos. I don't think it happened like that. I think they happened simultaneously. That's my opinion. Okay? While you had maybe the first or second line concentrating on the push, right, the othismos, you probably had the guys behind who are, pushing, but also spearing. Because the length of that spear, that's an 8-foot spear. And they're usually counterbalanced so that the majority of the weight is in the back. So that way, you might have 3 feet to the back, but 5 feet to the front. Right? So when you've got more range to the front as you're spearing in. So they're spearing constantly into the opposing side. Now, can you see how this starts to become very sinister, very, very violent? I mean, just spears. But that is why the Greeks, as independent, free peoples, except for their slaves, as independent, free peoples, devised a military concept which recognized the importance of the individual. And so Greek hoplite battle gear became extraordinarily protective. So we see here we have the Kinemides. The Kinemides are greaves. So this would protect my shins. Because remember, the aspis goes from chin from knee to chin. So my shins were exposed. Now they're not. Now if he takes the spear, the dory, I'll trust you. So if he takes that and he is stabbing toward that, that's going to more than likely hit. That's not going to go anywhere, or it might just go off. Okay, so now I'm protected by my kinemides, my greaves. And it was said that you should take as much care of your greaves as you should your everyday shoes. And to make sure that your greaves are well taken care of, fit well, and are always shining. And then when the greaves weren't in use, they would hook them on a little stand with a carrying handle, and they could carry the greaves with them and set them in their home. Yes?
You wouldn't wear any padding under these?
They were designed to fit your leg. So they would be springy. This bronze would be springy to clip around your leg. Oftentimes, like you see what I have tied around my ankles, you would need, to keep them from falling down onto your feet, you would have ankle garters, which would keep them up from falling down onto the top of your talus. Talus is the top of your foot, right there. Okay? Because if they did fall down, then it would be hard to walk. All right? But they were supposed to fit very well. These are just stock greaves, so they're not designed specifically for my legs. So these are kinemides, greaves. The dory, the 8-foot battle spear, of course you see the sarada, the lizard sticker, a bronze spike at the end. The bronze spike, one, if you were on bivouacking on campaign, you could stick the bronze spike into the floor, into the dirt, the mud. You wouldn't have to worry about rust or anything like that, moisture, because of the bronze, as opposed to the iron acme, the spearhead. Okay? But also, we know that this was often used as a secondary weapon. So if my spear were splintered or shattered, like stories tell of the Battle of Marathon, that as the 10,000 Athenian Greeks stormed the beaches against the Persians, and the onslaught ensued, and that the Persians were clamoring back to their ships, that they would often try to grab the spears of the Athenians. So there were 10,000 Athenians, there were about 25,000 Persians, 10,000 Athenians, and about 1,000 Plataeans. And in that battle at Marathon in 490 BC, about 6,400 Persians were killed on the beach, and only 192 Athenians died, were killed. And that is because the Athenians were in heavy hoplite armor, consisting of the aspis, the kinemides, the spolos, the chronos.
What about the Persian?
The Persians, stand up. Where's your headgear, Persian? The Persians, so this would have been a sparabara, a spearman for the Persians. He was most likely not a free people. He was a conscript. The Shah Hadshah, the king of kings, the emperor of Persia, didn't care about him. He had no real rights. He was just fodder for the war machine. So he basically got pajamas to wear. Okay? So you cannot compare his pajamas against my 70 pounds of leather, bronze, and wood that covered my entire body completely. Okay? There was very little. My right arm was exposed, and that was really about it. Okay? So, there's a hatchet over there on that. Good. So, the Persian might have the battle axe, this little battle axe. Right? And as the Persian is coming at me, I will grab me one of those tennis ball ones. Persian, I'm going to give you a fighting chance here. A regular square bar, or do you want a shield of one of the immortals?
The immortal.
You'll take the immortals. So the immortals were the only real professional army in the Persian Empire. And they were a unit of 10,000 men. You have to use the telemon. So the telemon is the strap that goes around you. Okay, and then it does have, now if you notice here, he has a center handle. Go ahead and show them the center handle. He's got a center handle. So when he turns that side to side, what happens to his protection? It changes, doesn't it? But if he wants to switch, the real strength of the Persian Empire was in their archers. Okay, archery was their main part of their army. Their infantry was mostly conscripts. Tens and tens of thousands of conscripts. So as the Persians would march through their territory, it might take 1 to 2 years to assemble their army. As they would march through different conquered territories, they'd pull up to a village and they'd say, we need, how many adult men of military age and health do you have? We need them. They need to be ready to go tomorrow. Right? And if you don't go, you suffer bad consequences. Okay? Because the Persian emperor did not take lightly to anybody not doing as he said. There is a story that in about 481 BC, as Xerxes was assembling his army for the march into Greece, for the second invasion of Greece. Okay? He's in the area of Lydia, which is modern-day Turkey. And he came across Pythias. Pythias was the grandson of Croesus, King Croesus, who had been known as the richest man alive of his day, back in the mid-6th century. Croesus had talked to Solon and done some other things. But Pythias was his grandson, and Pythias was ultra rich. And he had 5 sons, I believe 5 sons. And as Xerxes was getting ready to march into Greece, Xerxes, of course, had his children, his cousins, his uncles, everybody was with him, right? Part of his entourage. Pythias begged Xerxes, please leave one of my sons at home so that he might take care of me in my old age. This enraged Xerxes, because what did this mean to Xerxes? It meant that Pythias didn't have complete and utter confidence in Xerxes' ability to crush and conquer the Greeks. So this was an affront to Xerxes' ego. So Xerxes agreed, I will leave one of your sons. I will leave your youngest son here for you. And then the next morning, as he was assembling his army to march out, he took Pythias' youngest son and he split him in half. And he impaled one half of him on one side of the road and the other half on the other side of the road as he marched his army in between. So the Spartavara it didn't matter if he lived or died. But me, as a free Greek who had a voice in my own government of my polis, I had actually a voting voice, whether I was Spartan, Athenian, Corinthian, right, Argive. I had a voting voice, so my safety and my return mattered. His return didn't matter to Xerxes. Does that make sense? That's why you see such a discrepancy in what we had. Okay? So, figure out where I was going with that. If I had my dory and I was stabbing at him, the dory, of course, would go through that wicker shield. Right? The dory would go through that wicker shield. He doesn't stand a chance if I can get in on him. If I have this, if I have my aspis and he's coming at me, okay, and my aspis and he's coming at me and he comes into me, right? Right? If I can get around his shield and move his shield out of the way, I can go in, strike, strike. And then him coming around my aspis, even if he takes a chunk out of it, right? I've also got my, hold on for 1 second. I also have my chronos. So even if that axe lands, it lands against my helmet, that might give me a headache, but most likely it's going to veer off, because why? This helmet is completely what? Bronze, but it's round. Okay? It's convex. The entire surface of it is convex. So anything that strikes it is most likely going to glance off. All right? Now, I will tell you that this does have very limited vision, but when my entire purpose is just march forward, spear everything in front of me. Okay? And I can't move because there's guys to my right and guys to my left and people behind me. Doesn't matter if my field of vision is limited, because the only thing I need to see is what I'm killing in front of me. Now, if something did happen to my spear, to my dory, that is where the serrator comes in. If the dory breaks, I can always flip it around and I still have the secondary weapon of the serrator. Likewise, if he falls, let's say he's wounded and he's on the ground. So he's wounded and he's on the ground. Okay? It's completely on the ground because he's really wounded. Right? All the way back. Right? Now, let's say his shield is off to the side. Okay? Now, as the phalanx continues to march, I won't actually march on top of him, but we would just simply march right over the top. We'd be stepping on him. Because we didn't have the same value. Remember, the monotheistic religions didn't exist really yet. Well, Christianity didn't exist. There was no such thing as turning the other cheek. All right? It was do unto others tenfold as they would do unto you. Okay? So if you were to dare harm me, I will harm you 10 times as bad. All right? So now, as he is lying there wounded, wiggling and squiggling, I, with my serrator, will spear him. So as the front ranks, the promachoi, the front rankers, are marching against the opposing phalanx, we have the uragos, the rear rankers, usually the older guys, right? Because the age of military service would have been from 18 to 60. So you had 42 age classes that were still eligible to fight. Okay? So the older guys, the old graybeards, would have been in the back. Now they're in the back because they're veterans. And so they're more stalwart, and they're going to keep pushing the other people ahead. The guys in the front, the promachoi, are often the bravest, right? They're the bravest, the most gung-ho. They want to do things. They want glory and everything else. And oftentimes, the Olympic champions would be in the very front next to the king, the basileus, the king, would be in front and center. The hippes, the knights, okay, which we get from the word hippos, from horses. They would be in the front with the king as well. So the promachoi would consist of the Olympic champions, the knights, the king. And they would have the best armor as well. In the middle would be the guys that maybe you weren't 100% sure of. Maybe they didn't have the best armor. Maybe they weren't the most gung-ho or looking to be the next Achilles. All right? So the rear rankers, the uragos, would be behind, steadfastly pushing them forward. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't go backwards. Not with the entire file of veterans pushing them forward. So it would be those rear rankers whose job would be to skewer any fallen enemy on the battlefield so that they would no longer be able to molest me as I went over. Because if he was still alive enough, he could hit me in the leg, hit me in the groin, okay? Which would be very painful. Right? So, you can go ahead and come up. So that's what the serrato
Are you seeing the phalanx?
Yes. What time do we have? Do you want me to put this on?
Yeah.
All right. I need some assistance with this. And while I do this, I need 8 warriors with 8 helpers. We might call them helots, we might call them whatever, but I need 8 warriors with 8 helpers. That's probably almost half the audience. Right, 8 people. Up, 8 people. Who's going to do it? 8 people.
You want first? Ryan and
All right.
You guys gotta go.
Now, you guys stay first. Now, I might only need 6 people, actually. 6 and 6. They have 2 here already. Okay, over there in the corner, you will see cranoid, helmets, and you'll see, I think, 4 cuirasses. Okay, I want you to put those on and grab a kranos. Okay, and you 2 can wear those 2 if you like. Yes, I do need help with this. Dr. Shank, you've done this before, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the original map?
Now, does anybody want to come over here and see how heavy this is?
Yeah, come on, man. Come on, man. Ryan, there you go.
So imagine wearing that in battle all day in the hot Mediterranean sun. Yeah, that's about 40 pounds of leather. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hold on. Remember, the strap, this one has to go underneath. The strap should already be there, they just go around.
It goes around that.
The bottom has to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
I feel like Scarlet O'Hara.
That's normally not a problem.
fair.
Looking good, Walter.
Okay.
Okay, now, pull my sleeves up a little bit. Just a little bit. Still nice, cool. Now, my Xephos. My Xephos is my short sword. So if my shield, if my dory were to completely break, or if I dropped it, I would go to the short sword. Short sword, somebody put that around the neck there. Got it? So, we see in the words of Tertius that you're going to use your short sword or your long spear. So here is the Xephos. This is a razor-sharp sword, which I would stab into your neck, or your eye, or your armpit, or slice your arm off with. Okay? This is very deadly again. This one is actually made from Damascus steel. Damascus steel would not have been historically accurate for that time period, but I figure if I'm spending thousands of dollars on a one-of-a-kind made sword, I'm going to have it made with something that's going to last. I've used this against bovine carcasses as well, and it can literally chop with one stroke, about 3 inches into a bovine sternum. If that can go into a bovine sternum, imagine what it would do to your humerus or to your cervical vertebrae. Okay? And everything that the Greeks did was very ornate. Very, very, very ornate. Artwork was everywhere. I have sphinxes here on my Epimedes. These are called Epimedes. All right, this is a spolos. This is a Xephos. And I have a lion here. Of course, a lion denotes that I'm courageous and strong and brave. All right. On the back, on the neck, you'll see that it has the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. All right. Why is there an Egyptian goddess on a Greek armor? Well, because I'm Egyptian, actually. So I wanted something that was a homage to my heritage. But the Greeks looked at and revered Egyptian culture. They revered Egyptian culture. And oftentimes, Greek mercenaries would be hired by Egyptian pharaohs as part of their military. So there was a lot of interaction between the Greeks and the Egyptians. Okay, now, we have everybody set. Right, I need everybody to come and grab one of these small shields. Grab a small shield. Right, once everybody grabs a small shield, everybody's going to take a tennis ball tipped dory. So, come over here, grab your tennis ball tipped dory. More of you. Who else doesn't have a dory yet? I have 2 more dories, 3 more dories. I should have 3 more people ready.
Sorry, it's a small phalanx.
It's a small phalanx? Anybody else? Anybody else? Small phalanx, all right. Nobody else wants to join? All right. So, let's have the phalanx. Everybody stand in one line. Facing this way. Stand in one line. I feel like I'm telling my karate class to line up. One line. Good. Facing forward. All right. Now, your shield is going to overlap the shield of the person to your right. Okay? Now, everybody take your left foot forward. All right. Now, raise your spears and grab it with an overhand grip. Alright? Then raise your spears aloft. Aloft. There you go. Raise your spears aloft. Now, this would have been the frontage of a Greek phalanx. But you might have had hundreds of people across. Alright? It would have went, the battlefields of ancient Greece were often level land, because a phalanx couldn't maneuver over uneven terrain or rocks or things like that, because they were these heavily armored men just marching forward. So if there was any rough terrain or streams or big outcroppings, it would make the phalanx deform as it had to maneuver around it. So flat plains were typically the battlefields preferred by the Greeks, which is why a lot of the battles took place on the same battlefield over and over and over again, over the centuries. So this would have been the phalanx. Now, everybody, left, right, as they march forward. The phalanx would have been coming at you like a giant prickly-tipped porcupine. Okay? Now, I mentioned how they have the various files and rows, right? So, I want to show the phalanx from the side. So, this first person here, face that way. And everybody face that way around him. But maneuver your story. Now, press your shield into the back of the person ahead of you. Okay? And everybody go backwards a little bit so we got some room. Backwards, backwards, backwards. Everybody backwards, backwards, backwards. A little bit more. Good. Now, from here, guy in the front. You know who you are, right? Okay. You stay where you are for a second. Don't move. Everybody else, from the back all the way up to the gentleman in the front, press mildly against his back of your shield. Now, can you feel the pressure behind you? So, he feels the pressure behind him, right? Persian, come up. Where's your shield?
I'm sorry, I took a shoe.
And your hatchet. Tell him on. Phalanx waits for no one. All right, so now, you have at Thermopylae, you have at Plataea, all right, you have at these various battles that are known between the Greeks and the Persians, you have the Greek phalanx of the Spartans, the Athenians, okay, the Spartans and the Thespians at Thermopylae, primarily, the Athenians and the Plataeans at Marathon, the Spartans and the Athenians and other allied Greeks at Plataea, marching in phalanx against a band of Spartabara, conscripted Persian soldiers, primarily wearing very light to no armor, cloth, with wicker shields, short spears. He might have had a short spear like this. He may have had the short spear, which didn't have nearly the reach of the long dory, right? And so they're going to come running in to this formation, which is marching forward now, slowly, left, right, march forward, always pushing against the person in front of me. All right? You guys can stop. So now we see how the Greek phalanx would have worked. But now imagine this line 8 deep, and then another row directly next to them, directly next to them, directly next to them, all lined up like you saw the front, like you saw the frontage, right? Just a giant mass of shields, leather, bronze, wood, and muscle coming at you. Okay? The Greeks also culturally had athletics as part of their culture. No other real people at that time had athletics and exercise as part of their normal culture outside of maybe the nobility. Okay? The nobility would have hunted and did horseback riding and possibly some sort of fighting or exercise, but the regular people would have been farmers, masons, artisans, blacksmiths, whatever, right? They weren't, there was no physical culture. But in Greece, there was a physical culture of gymnastics, boxing, wrestling, pancration, which was the ancient Greek mixed martial arts. There's a story that the Spartans were so good at pancration that they were forbidden from competing in the Olympics because they would always kill their opponents. So they were finally said, you guys can't compete anymore. So they had a physical culture. They actually did running and weightlifting. You guys can turn around and relax and face them. Now, let's show, we have 6 people, right? 3 of you come this way, you 3 come this way, and you 3 turn around and face them. It does take a while to get used to all the gear. That's why the Spartans had the agoge, which was their training school from age 7 to 18, and that the other city-states had the ephebate, which were the epheboi, which were the youth, 18 to 20 years of age, would have entered the military training, and their first year would have been mostly athletics and things like what's called the Pyrrhic dance. The Pyrrhic dance was named after Pyrrhokos, and it was kind of like a kata or a forms like you would see in martial arts today, but it was involving the shield and spear, and it would teach them to music, to rhythm, how to sidestep, how to dodge blows, how to make blows, right? So they'd be moving to music to learning how to do these different combative movements, okay? And then there was also the Hoplite, which is the hoplite run, which was done sometimes nude, but sometimes in armor with your shield. And it happened after about, we first see it around 520 or so BC, after the Ionian Greeks first encountered the Persians in Asia Minor. And it was a method, because the Persians were masked archers and would shoot their volleys into the air, the hoplites had to run, charge the Persian archers. So as the volley of arrows came over, they would have to run under the volley of arrows to not be in the beaten zone, to not have arrows piercing them as they came down. So the Hoplitodromos, the hoplite run, was born. And this was practiced, and it was also an Olympic event. Now, so we don't have a whole lot of people here, but we're going to show how, as they just take a couple steps further back. So first, we're going to have the epholos, the march, just left, right to music. You have a salpinx or an aulus, a flute or something playing a beat. And that's what you would march to, especially the Spartans were very, very good at this. That's why they were so well drilled, because they actually marched to music. Other phalanxes from other city-states weren't nearly as well trained, and so they would often break formation. But they're going to start marching toward each other, just a couple steps. Okay, now they charge toward each other, and then clash shields gently. Clash shields together, gently. Boom! And now our 2 phalanxes have met each other. Okay? Now, as they've met each other, now the promachoi, the front lines, are really pushing into each other. They're digging their heels into the ground, right? Stand strongly against them, digging both heels into the ground, biting their lips with their teeth, covering their thighs and legs beneath, right? Just like Tertius says. So now they're pushing into each other. Now imagine the people, he really can't be that concerned with what he's spearing right now, because he's just worried about pushing. But the people behind him would be the ones spearing. The storm of spears, the dortismos, into the ones here, trying to get into the eye sockets or into the throat or into the armpit or anything that's exposed. Because as one person starts to fall, middle person in the middle, you fall. They go down. The phalanx is broken. So now as the phalanx breaks and they can start to move through and move in, then one phalanx would break, and as it broke its cohesion, it no longer has the same strength that it had before. And then they might turn and start to flee. So they turn and start to flee. And now the other phalanx is in quick pursuit. So now they pursue. So this point at which the battle changed hands, and this side here became now the victorious side, this is called the point of tropez, the tropez. And so they'll remember this point on the battlefield for when the battle is over, because that's where they'll erect the tropeion. The tropeion will be a large trophy, like a tree or a stand or something that they'll erect in the battlefield, and they'll take the armor and the shields and the helmets from several of the fallen enemy, and they'll nail it to the tropeion to show everybody this is where we won. This is where the tide of battle turned in our favor. And these are the spoils of war. So now as they pursue the aspides, the aspis, the shield, is not that useful. According to Euripides said that the aspis and the equipment of the Greek, of the hoplite, becomes a burden to him outside of the phalanx. So if they're no longer in the phalanx, they're in this heavy armor with these big shields, and so they're going to be more easily overrun. So the strength of this armor and these shields and everything else really lies in our ability to maintain a cohesive team. Okay, because that lends itself to our greater survival. All right? Any questions?
We better wrap it up.
We better wrap it up. All right. Yes?
Did the color of the crest have any significance?
The crests usually were, things like that make you taller, to make you more intimidating, just like in nature, so an animal blowing itself up. But the crests were most likely to denote rank, so that visually you could see somebody with a crest this way, or maybe a transverse crest, or maybe 3 crests or something else that would denote rank, so you'd be able to spot the commanders and stuff on the field.
Okay, well let's all thank both Gamal Castile, all of our hoplites and Persians, and could they come up and look at the stuff here?
Yes,
afterward?
yes.
Okay.
Let's
Well,
get these people here out of their gear, and then